Hugh McLean walked across the parking lot to the cafeteria for lunch. He was on his second shift and hungry after 5 hours of continuous work in the crane cab. As he approached the double doors leading to the cafeteria, he noticed small groups of workers engrossed in lively conversations. Something had happened, and with so many people talking about it, it couldn't be anything good. He wondered if someone had been killed on the job. That usually got everyone's attention. As he approached the first group, he spotted a man he knew and turned to him. "Hey Bert, how's it going? Looks like the Ironworkers Union is going on strike this afternoon. They don't have a contract and they think this is a good chance to impose one on the company. Are you sure? What will it mean for the rest of us? I know the Operating Engineers Union won't let me cross the picket line, and I wouldn't want that." Hugh was a little concerned, for there were only 3 days to go before the work was finished. He was ready to go home after 3 weeks away from the construction site. 3 weeks of 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week, and he couldn't wait to get back to his wife and adopted son. Jobs like this, when the plant stopped for major repairs, always meant good money but terrible hours. The young guys liked them and said they had closing fever, but he was just about ready to find himself a normal job with 5 days a week somewhere closer to home, a job that would allow him to spend nights with his family. He exchanged a few more phrases with the group, but still hadn't been able to find out anything about a possible strike. There wasn't much time left until lunch break, so he headed to the cafeteria to fill his empty stomach. While he ate, he managed to catch a glimpse of several pickup trucks pulling up and a group of white-helmeted executives who began addressing the workers in the parking lot. After finishing his meal, Hugh came out with a styrofoam cup of coffee and managed to hear the general manager tell them to check the lists pinned to the cafeteria wall, and that if your name wasn't on them, you were fired with 1 day's pay in lieu of proper notice. A strike was indeed looming, and while they thought it would only take a day or two, they were going to let some of the workers go, as they didn't need a full crew to finish the job. Hugh turned and saw a dozen sheets of paper pinned to the wall, and was in an advantageous position to be one of the first to familiarize himself with them. They were all arranged alphabetically, and he did not immediately notice that Hugh McLean was not there. He was glad of that, for it meant that he would be able to go home this afternoon and get there before midnight if traffic didn't interfere. It was only a few hours before he checked out of the warden's office and returned to the room he had rented to pack. After quickly stowing his clean clothes and dirty linens in his suitcases, he picked up a framed photograph from the bedside table. He always took it with him when he traveled and kept it in a prominent place. It was a picture taken on his and his ex Donna Charles's wedding day 4 years ago. It was a simple ceremony in front of a justice of the peace with only his sister and Donna's mother in attendance. Of course, her son Bobby was also present, but he was only 2 years old at the time. He and Donna were each 28 years old in the picture, and he decided it was still a pretty good shot of the two of them. In the picture, they were standing under an oak tree outside the courthouse. They were holding hands and looking at the camera, and Bobby was standing in front of them with a big smile on his face. Hugh was about 6 feet tall, with black hair and dark eyes, muscular build, with a ruddy complexion typical of spending a lot of time outdoors. Donna was shorter than Hugh by about 5 inches, a pretty brunette with hazel eyes. She wore her hair relatively short, which blended well with her facial features. She weighed about 135 pounds and had graceful curves in all the right places. Since Hugh had met her, she had been working as a secretary in a small real estate office. When all his things were packed, he headed to his car to drive home. Before he left, he tried to call home, but the busy signal told him that Donna was sitting on the phone, probably talking to his sister Kathy. They were like sisters, always planning something together over a cup of coffee or on the phone. It didn't matter, though, because it would be great to surprise her by coming home for the weekend. With any luck, he might even be able to get home by 10 o'clock, and they could have a few beers or glasses of wine together. The drive from his place of employment in central Minnesota to his home in central Illinois went more smoothly than he expected, and by 10:30, he pulled into his driveway but found the house plunged into darkness. Damn, Donna must have gone to bed early, he thought to himself. Gotta do something about that. A quick shower, and he'd join her to catch up on some lovemaking. He grabbed his suitcases and squeezed through the kitchen door. "Donna, I'm home. Get your sleepy ass over here and kiss me with pleasure." Hugh set the suitcases down in the kitchen and headed down the hall to the bedroom. To his surprise, when he turned on the light, the bed was empty. A quick check of Bobby's room showed that neither of them was in the house. Damn, he thought to himself. I should have called her. Putting the two suitcases in the bedroom, he headed for the door since Donna could only be in one place. Since Bobby wasn't home either, they would have to drive to his older sister Kathy's house. The drive was only 3 blocks and he decided not to call her beforehand. A pleasant surprise would be much more fun. He wondered if his brother-in-law Ralph was home. Ralph Roberts worked as a welder, often on out-of-town jobs like the one Hugh was laboring on. They had 2 sons, 8-year-old Barry and 12-year-old Ralph Jr. When he pulled into Kathy's driveway, it was clear that Donna's car wasn't there. That made him somewhat curious, but since he hadn't checked the garage at home, she could have just driven up. He saw the light on in the kitchen, and as he entered his sister's house, he knocked on the door. Kathy was sitting at the kitchen table and looked up in amazement and shock when he opened the door. Jesus Christ, Hugh, you almost scared me to death. Where did you come from? You were supposed to be in Minnesota until Monday or Tuesday. It's a long story, Kathy. The iron workers went on strike and the company laid off a bunch of us early. I happened to be one of the lucky ones. I got the rest of my shift today plus my full paycheck for tomorrow. I couldn't pass up a deal like that. Where's Donna? She's not home and neither is Bobby. As he spoke, Hugh poured himself a half cup of coffee and sat down at his sister's desk. Bobby's in the back bedroom right now, sleeping with my boys. Donna was invited over for drinks and cards with your friends, Allison and Jerry. She said she might be late, and instead of waking Bobby up and taking him home, she asked if I could watch him for the night, as if that might be a problem. As she spoke, Hugh suddenly raised his head, and all expression disappeared from his face. When he spoke, there was a subtle change in the tone of his voice that Kathy had not noticed. Did she say she was visiting Allison and Jerry? What time did she go there? He watched Kathy carefully as she answered his questions. Yeah, she said she played cards with Allison and Jerry. I think she left here around 8:30. She said you two walked together a lot. She had dinner with them last Friday night too. I don't mind. Bobby is very nice and looks after my two when I need a babysitter. Yes, we visit them often. He and I work on a lot of cases together. Tell you what, I'm going to go and join them. Don't call and say I'm coming. I want it to be a surprise. Hugh stood up, drained his cup of coffee, and headed for the door. I'll call you tomorrow, Kathy. He waved a quick goodbye to his sister and headed out the door. He had a look of serious concern on his face. As he drove to Allison and Jerry Black's house, many thoughts ran through his mind. The day before he left for his job in Minnesota, Allison Black had called him. Donna wasn't home at the time, so he chatted with her. The reason for the call was to tell him that she was leaving in the morning to visit her sister in California for a month. Her sister was expecting twins and had asked Allison to come and help her through the last week of her pregnancy and the first few weeks at home with her newborn. Hugh was sure he had forgotten to tell Donna about that call. If Allison was in California, who, he wondered, was Donna visiting? If she wasn't at the Black house, where had she gone? He figured that perhaps Allison had canceled the trip for some reason, or Kathy had gotten her names mixed up. He really hoped that was the case, as otherwise there could have been major trouble. In their 4 years of marriage, he had no reason to doubt his wife, but the thought was already creeping in at the back of his mind that perhaps she was hiding something from him and his sister. Jerry Black often talked about how much he appreciated Donna's looks and body curves. On a couple of occasions when he had a few too many drinks, he made snide remarks that Donna laughed at. At first, Hugh noticed Donna's looks, but what really interested him was her colorful personality. She was a single mom when he met her, but after meeting Bobby, the fact that she had a child became unimportant to him. He really liked her boy, and they had become very close once he and Donna became a couple. Lately, he had begun to think about officially adopting Bobby and giving him the last name McLean. Hugh decided that he would stop by Allison and Jerry's first to make sure that his concerns were just foolishness. As he turned down the street toward their house, he realized that his heart was beating faster than usual. What if she isn't here, or what if she is here and Allison is actually in California? These thoughts raced through his head as he pulled up in front of the Black's house. Jerry's car was parked in the driveway, but there was another car in front of it that he couldn't see. He hoped it wasn't his wife's car. The house was semi-dark, and he knew that if they were playing cards and drinking, they were in the kitchen or living room, and it was obvious from the way he parked that there were no lights on downstairs. Staring at the house and the mysterious car in the shadows, did nothing to calm Hugh's frantically pounding heart. After a little thought, he quietly got out of the car and, trying to be as quiet as possible, closed the door. He had to check out the mysterious car in the shadows to see if it belonged to his wife or not. When he walked around the side of Jerry's red Mustang, his worst fears were confirmed. It was Donna's car. Apparently, she had passed Jerry's car and parked in front of it. Hugh was confused. He didn't know what to do, and he didn't understand exactly what was going on inside. He decided to walk around the house, figuring that maybe they were on the patio. Walking down the sidewalk on the side of the house, he began to feel calmer, convincing himself that they were sitting on the patio drinking beer. As he rounded the side of the house, however, he saw that the patio was empty. No one was enjoying a drink under the stars. He walked further into the backyard and looked up at the house. A dim light burned in the window in the center of the top floor. He had been in this house often enough to know which room he was in. Anger overwhelmed him and he quickly headed to his car, opened the trunk and pulled out the hammer he kept there. Walking purposefully towards the house, he took the hammer in his hand. Only as he approached the side door did he begin to slow his step and control his thoughts. First, he decided to use the spare key he knew was under the mat by the door. He could already imagine their astonished faces as he swung the hammer and entered the dimly lit bedroom. Eventually, however, a vision of the consequences visited him, and he realized that he could not do this to another human being, regardless of his motives. He would have to kill himself as well, as he couldn't imagine living with the reality of what he was about to do. He stood at the back door, tapping the hammer lightly on his palm and contemplating what he should do. Finally, he backed away from the door and headed for his wife's car. Donna had a bad habit of leaving her keys in the tray on the center console when she parked the car. He always told her that if the door was unlocked and the keys were in plain sight, it was an open invitation for someone to steal the car. He quietly opened the door, took the keys, and left the hammer on the driver's seat. Closing the door quietly, he got in the car and drove to the house he and Donna shared. The drive was only a few blocks, and as soon as he turned into the driveway, the full effect of what was happening came over him. The fatigue he felt after a long day of working and driving, combined with the realization that the woman he had fallen in love with was now in his former good friend's bed, brought tears to his eyes. For the next 10 minutes, which seemed like an hour, the tears flowed non-stop as he mourned what he had lost. Eventually, the grief began to be displaced again by anger, a controlled anger that made him think of a plan to save his pride and punish his cheating wife. As the plan took shape, he regained control of his emotions, and 15 minutes later he was out of the car and heading for the house with a look of determination on his face. The first thing he did was unload 2 suitcases and take the dirty laundry to the laundry room. The dirty clothes could be washed while he went about his business. The empty suitcases lay on the bed, and he began to carefully fill them with clothes from his closet and dresser. When both suitcases were completely filled and there was nothing else in them, he carried them to the car. He knew there were boxes in the basement, so he went downstairs and retrieved several of them, carefully dumping their contents in a pile on the basement floor. Donna could find replacements and put everything away later. He slowly walked through the house, picking up things that belonged to him. The house and the furniture belonged to Donna. She was already living in it when he met her, so there was no need to worry about who got what. Hugh knew he hadn't contributed many things to this house, although he could call some of them his own. The laptop he'd bought to replace an outdated computer system. The old system he'd left to Donna and Bobby. They had 2 DVD players, so he carefully removed the one hooked up to the TV in the basement and packed it into the car. By 3 in the morning, the car was full, and he set out to find a motel room for the weekend. He found a clean place about 3 miles from his former home and unloaded the first load from the car into the room. An hour later, he returned to the house and loaded more of what he considered his share of the common property. He put dishes and cutlery in one box, linens in another, and books, CDs, DVDs, and videotapes he considered his own in a third. While he was packing, his work clothes were washed, dried, and put in the car. It took the last hour to put the tools from the basement and garage into the trunk. By 6:30, he was done and slowly walked through the house looking for what he had missed. The last thing he found was a recent picture of Bobby, and he put it in his pocket. Finally, he sat down at the kitchen table, and after drinking a glass of cold water, he wrote a short note and put it in an envelope. The envelope was left lying in the middle of the kitchen table, and Donna's keychain was attached to it. As he left the door unlocked. Half an hour later, he was already stowing the rest of his belongings in his motel room. He spent the next 10 minutes under a hot shower, washing away the sweat and tears that had come to his eyes when he realized it was over. Climbing naked into bed, he fell asleep almost immediately. The long day, stress and emotions had finally caught up with him. Donna McClain hurried down the sidewalk to her back door, annoyed that it was already 8:30 and she wanted to get home well before 8 so no one would see her return. Some stupid kids had stolen her car keys, and she quickly went home to get a spare set of keys. Jerry had offered her a ride, but she was very resentful of him and also worried about what the neighbors would think if a strange man gave her a ride home at this hour. It was safer for her to just walk home on her own. Her biggest fear was that her spare house key would be in the wrong place, at the bottom of her clothespin bag. Walking to the back door, she turned the knob out of habit and was surprised to see the door open in front of her. Silently cursing herself for forgetting to lock it, she hurried inside and placed her purse on the counter. If she remembered correctly, the spare car keys should be in the drawer under the phone. Walking over to the phone, she glanced at the desk and realized something wasn't lying there. Stopping and taking a closer look, she realized that the missing bunch of keys were lying in the middle of the kitchen table. "How did they get there?" she said out loud without even realizing it, so shocked was she to see the bunch of keys on the table. She reached for the bunch of keys and then noticed the envelope underneath. Curiosity was quickly replaced by anxiety, and she looked around to make sure no one else was in the room. With trembling hands, she picked up the envelope and pulled the paper out of it. At that moment, something fell out of the envelope and rolled across the kitchen floor. She thought she saw something under the edge of the counter, at the spot where the object had disappeared from view. Donna unfolded the paper and reread it twice before she realized what it said. When the realization came, she collapsed onto a kitchen chair, covered her face with her hands, and sobbed. She began to repeat over and over, "God, no, God, no." This became her mantra as she sat on the chair rocking back and forth. Tears streamed down her cheeks and her hands that still covered her face. After a few minutes, the phrases she was saying were replaced with, "What have I done? What have I done?" Eventually, she calmed down enough to pick up the note and reread it again, hoping it didn't say what she thought it said. This time, she read it carefully. "You and this supposed friend of mine are lucky I didn't go upstairs and beat you to death with this hammer. Tell that bastard to stay out of my way. If he ever shows up at the construction site where I work, he might not survive. I took my stuff and I'm not coming back. If I left anything behind, you can do whatever you want with it. I'll let you explain to Bobby why I'm no longer around." She was still snorting and sobbing quietly when she stood up to see what had fallen to the floor. When she picked it up and saw that it was Hugh's wedding ring, she collapsed to her knees on the floor and the tears and loud sobs returned. Hugh slept the sleep of the dead, waking only at 6 o'clock in the evening. He was awakened by an urgent urge to urinate, and he quickly got up and went to the bathroom. It wasn't until he was back in the main part of the motel room that memories of the previous night's events came over him. He stopped, remembering the pain of the previous night, and sat on the edge of the bed, contemplating what to do next. He spent the next half hour going through his clothes looking for the things he needed to get out of his room and eat dinner. Hunger was his main problem, for he hadn't eaten in almost 24 hours. The last time he had eaten a hamburger and fries was at a car service center on the way home. After getting dressed, he called the front desk to get a room for the next couple of days, then grabbed his cell phone and headed out to dinner. There was a cute cafe a block away from the motel and he went in. After sitting down in a chair and placing his order, he pulled out his cell phone and turned it on. Almost immediately it rang, and he realized from the caller ID that it was his wife's number. He turned the phone off and slipped it back into his pocket. The last thing he wanted to do was talk to that bitch, he told himself. As he sat and thought about what had happened, he looked at the window he was sitting at and scrutinized his own reflection. He realized he hadn't combed his hair or shaved before leaving the motel. That was all he thought of himself as a normal person. The food looked very appetizing, but Hugh found that it was tasteless to him. All he could think about was what he had stumbled upon when he came home unexpectedly. How many times had that bitch visited his friends while he was working out of town? He never would have thought she was capable of such a thing, but the proof was in front of him. It suddenly occurred to him that maybe his own sister had known about this all along, and the anger returned. Upon reflection, however, he realized that she must not have known what Donna was up to, or she would have called her and warned her. He decided to call Kathy to let her know that he was okay. When he turned on his cell phone, he was informed that he had voicemail messages. He listened to the first three of them, but found that they were all variations of the same message. Donna was apologizing, crying, begging for forgiveness, begging him to call her. As he continued going through the messages, he hit the delete button as soon as he heard her voice. It wasn't until the seventh message that his sister's voice reached him. He listened to it. "Hugh, please call and let me know you're okay. Donna called me this morning and she's fine. It took a while, but I finally got her to tell me what happened. She said you left her, that you took all your stuff and moved out. Call me as soon as you get this message." The next 9 messages were from Donna, and he deleted them all without listening. The last message was another from his sister, begging him to call her. He sat down and stared at the phone, not knowing what he should do. Donna didn't seem to have told Kathy what was really going on. He ordered a cup of coffee and, when it arrived, dialed his sister's number. It rang 4 times, then he switched to the answering machine and left her a message. "Guess that bitch didn't tell you the whole story about why I left? Allison Black went to California the weekend I was out of town. Donna was there with Jerry and they weren't playing cards in the kitchen. I'll have the divorce finalized as soon as I can get in touch with a lawyer. You can tell her to stop calling me because I won't listen to any more of her messages. After the first 3, I just deleted them all. Maybe I'll call you tomorrow or some other time. Bye." Hugh spent the next hour sipping coffee with 2 refills. He couldn't believe his happy marriage had faded so quickly into oblivion. He tried to think back over all the years he'd spent with Donna and find a single memory that would make him believe she was cheating on him. He couldn't remember anything, but he felt like he was clearly missing something. How could she go from devoted wife to cheating whore right under his nose? His eyes filled with tears again as he thought of the good times, and there had been many. Eventually, he left and drove aimlessly around town for a while before finally returning to his motel room. A long nap and a cup of coffee kept him awake, and he busied himself sorting through his hastily packed things. The room was connected to the internet, and he set up his laptop. The next hour passed quickly as he did online banking, transferring his share from their joint accounts to his personal savings account. He was careful not to take every last dime he was entitled to. He wanted to take a favorable position in this whole sordid affair. It was Saturday night, and he knew most of the union boys would be at the Midway bar. By 11 o'clock, he was done with the banking and sorting, decided to clean up and go down to the bar to see if any of the guys knew what vacancies were available. He decided that the best solution would be to find a good job out of town to get away from Donna and Jerry. He was starting to have some serious anger issues, and hanging around town wasn't going to help them, he was sure. Half an hour later, he was sitting with 3 other elevatorsmen he had often worked with in the past. He quickly found out that the best job at the moment was in Alaska, where a large pumping station was being built for oil production on the North Slope. That meant working 6 weeks at a time with 2 days off. There were openings for a crane operator, but few people wanted to take such a job requiring long absences from town. He thought, "That sounds perfect. I can get away from this bitch and make enough money to set up my own place." After 2 beers with the guys, he declined and went back to the motel, mulling over a new plan. By Wednesday morning, he had accomplished a lot. He hired a lawyer to start divorce proceedings, citing irreconcilable differences as the reason, and left the lawyer with a list of things he had taken and things he had left behind, as well as his email address. At the union office, he was set up with the contractors doing the Alaska project, and he signed all the papers, committing to spend at least 6 weeks on the North Slope. He found a storage company that would take his meager belongings and store them while he was away. Over the past few days, he'd deleted 24 more voicemails from Donna. He hadn't listened to a single one of them. The one call to his sister was again answered by an answering machine, so he simply told her he'd be in touch and turned off his cell service. At 11 a.m. Wednesday morning, he boarded the first flight of a complicated series of connections that would take him to the North Slope by Thursday evening. He felt nothing but relief as the plane taxied out of the landing tunnel. His car was parked in the long-term storage lot, his bags in the hold of the plane, his laptop in the overhead compartment, and he was already beginning to distance himself from the source of the aching, empty feeling in his chest. As the plane took off, he leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes, but all he could see was the happy couple with the smiling little boy in the picture taken on their wedding day. The next week was a dizzying plane ride, a long ride in the school bus that brought him to camp, a 2-day training and safety seminar settling into a 10 by 12-foot dorm room, and the first 3 12-hour shifts at the construction site where he lifted pipes and equipment. The work was tedious, the food was rushed, and the alarm clock rang too early. On the morning of the 4th day of work, Hugh woke up and felt much better, getting used to his new surroundings. After his shift, he set up his laptop, sent an email to his sister, and began exploring the features of his temporary home. Up until this point, all he had done was work, eat, and sleep. He could barely think about Donna and her cheating, but he realized it was time to begin his own healing, and the best way to do that was to approach everything wisely. That night, when his shift was over and he headed to the cafeteria, Hugh decided to pay attention, and his new interest in exploring the world around him was rewarded. In the corner of the cafeteria, he was surprised to see a man he knew well. Frank Carpenter had been one of Hugh's best friends in high school, but over time they had drifted apart, mostly because Hugh was married and Frank was not. "Frank, how the hell are you doing? I'm surprised to see you here. How long have you been in Alaska?" Hugh sat down in the empty seat across from his old friend and extended his hand for a firm handshake. "My brother works for your union, and he told me about working here. I've had a ticket with the Teamsters for several years now, and I've been working here for 3 weeks as a truck driver. It's going well so far. It's not too bad when you get used to having nowhere to go but this work town and construction site." Frank, like Hugh, was glad to meet a familiar person. The men continued their pleasant conversation, discussing what had changed in their lives since the last time they had met. Eventually, the conversation turned to Hugh's life, and after some hesitation to gather his thoughts, Hugh explained his new circumstances to Frank. "A couple of weeks ago, things went south in my marriage. I was sent home early from work in Minnesota, just in time to catch my wife with Jerry Black. I moved out and am now in the process of getting a divorce. It proves once again that once you get settled, things happen that can surprise the hell out of you." Hugh's cheerful mood vanished, and he looked at Frank rather glumly. "I'm sorry to hear that, Hugh. I'm sorry your wife succumbed to his delusions," Frank said with a sympathetic expression on his face. "I have no idea who was chasing who, Frank. I haven't spoken to that cheating bitch since it happened. I was afraid I'd lose her, and that would only make it worse." Frank hesitated whether to continue, but finally said, "You should probably talk to her. I know what Jerry is like, and he probably has a lot more to do with this than she does. I've seen you and your wife several times, and I always got the impression that she was very devoted to you. She was always hanging on your arm, making it clear that you were her man." "Yes, I guess you're right. I had already decided this morning that I would contact my sister by email. She and my wife have been communicating like thieves since high school. Maybe my sister will bring me up to speed enough that I can decide if I should risk talking to my ex. I've already started calling her my ex, even though I don't think the papers have even been served yet." Hugh shook his head and laughed at his Freudian slip. The friends moved on to other topics and spent the next half hour in animated conversation. Eventually, they left the cafeteria and went their separate ways. Hugh wanted to set up his computer to see if the promised internet connection really worked. When he finally set up his laptop and connected to the network, he was able to access his email, something he hadn't done since his trip to Minnesota. It took almost half an hour to delete the spam that had accumulated in his mail, as he didn't want to delete everything in case he missed something important. He was surprised to notice that Donna hadn't thought to send him an email since she had flooded his voicemail with her messages. Perhaps her computer was down, but in his opinion, she just hadn't thought of it. With a little thought, Hugh composed his message to his sister. He sincerely hoped he wasn't making a mistake, but at least with email, he could say exactly what he wanted to say without interruption. He reread the email one more time before sending it to its destination. "Hi, Kathy. I never got through to you on the phone, so I thought I'd send you a message to let you know where I am. I work on the north slope of Alaska. I got here a week ago and will be here for at least another 5 weeks. I guess now you know the whole story from Donna. I never thought she could do that to us, and I still can't talk calmly about it. The distance between us helps a lot, though. She may not have gotten the papers yet, but I've already set the wheels in motion to get the divorce. I'm sorry for what it might do to Bobby. Have you been able to find out how he's doing? I thought about trying to see him before I left, but I was afraid it would be harder on him than if I just disappeared from his life. He doesn't deserve to be in the middle of all this. You can forward this letter to Donna, as I would love to hear what she has to say for herself. Be sure to tell her not to send me message after message like she did on the phone. If she starts doing that again, I'll just cancel that email account and start a new one elsewhere. Hugh. Finished, Hugh closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. He began to ponder whether he should suggest that Donna contact him. He wasn't sure what he wanted to hear from his unfaithful spouse. He closed his eyes for a moment and the familiar scene from his favorite wedding painting flashed through his mind again. It wasn't until the next night after dinner that Hugh checked his email again, and sure enough, there were messages from both Kathy and Donna. He decided to read what had come from his sister and decide whether to read Donna's message at all after he had read what Kathy had written. My dear brother, thank you so much for contacting me. I was very worried about you. No one knew where you disappeared to, not even the people I talked to at the union office. Maybe they were just guarding your trust. But if they knew, I wish they had told me. I won't even tell you what went through my head. The reason you couldn't reach me at home was because I was either at Donna's or at the hospital. That Saturday morning, after you told her what you knew about her and Jerry, she completely lost her head. She called and told me the version I told you about, but she sounded so bad that I went to her house to calm her down. When I got to her house, I found her in the bathroom. She was crying hysterically, and I saw 2 empty pill bottles on the countertop. She tried to pick up the blade from the edge of the tub, but was so exhausted she couldn't lift it. I called an ambulance and she was taken to the hospital where her stomach was pumped. The psychiatrist who came on call gave her a prescription for antidepressants and she was discharged 2 days later. She seems to be doing okay now, but I check on her at least twice a day. Once she was back under control, she explained to me what happened, and you are right. At first, she didn't tell the whole story honestly. Now she has told me everything, and I believe she told me the truth. I won't repeat what she told me in case I got something wrong. I told her to email you and tell you everything herself. She will let me know when she emails you, and I will let you know if she doesn't tell you the same thing she told me. Good for you for deleting all those emails from her. I was present when some of them were written, and they were so incoherent and rambling that you wouldn't have been able to make sense of them anyway. Many of them she wrote in the hospital until her medication kicked in. I truly believe she loves you and is truly sorry for everything that has happened. I really hope you can find it in your heart to forgive her, because I believe you two belong together. Your loving sister, Kathy. After reading Kathy's message, Hugh decided he had a lot to think about and left Donna's message unread. Instead, he reread Kathy's message over and over again, and then finally turned off the computer and went to bed. He lay awake for 2 hours thinking about Donna and what a good time they had had, and finally fell into a restless sleep. The next night, Hugh lingered over dinner, knowing that he would have to decide whether to read Donna's letter when he returned to his room. Finally, after drinking his 3rd cup of coffee, he made the conscious decision to go back to his room and read what Donna wanted to say herself. As he opened the letter, he felt his heart pounding for some reason. My dear Hugh, thank you so much for letting me write to you. I realize that I probably have no right to ask you for anything, but I want you to know how much it means to me that you finally talked to me, even if only by email. I'm so anxious to hear your voice. First, I want to tell you that Bobby seems to be on the mend. He was at my mom's for a few days when Kathy was busy helping me. The rest of the time, he was either at my house or at your sister and her family's house. I told him what I did was wrong and that you were mad at me. I think he understands that. But he asks about you often, and I know he is very sad that you are not here. I'm very hurt that I betrayed your trust in me. I have never done it before, and I will never do it again if you give me a chance to prove it. Please know that I truly and sincerely love you. I don't know what to say about what happened to Jerry Black. I don't know how much you want to hear about it. I'll briefly explain to you what happened, but if you want me to tell you more, just ask me. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I was with him twice at his house. The second time was the night you caught me there, and the first time was the previous Friday night. That first Friday, he called me right after dinner and asked if I wanted to come over for a barbecue since both you and Allison were out of town. I didn't think that would be a problem and agreed. After the burgers, we had a few glasses of wine and that's when it hit me. We ended up cuddling and kissing on the couch. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't think it would lead to what it led to. I ended up spending the night on his couch. The second time, I should have known better when he called and invited me over for a couple drinks. I declined at first, but he hinted that he would find a way to tell you about our first tryst if I didn't show up. I guess I just expected us to fool around like we did the first time, but it turned out differently. He gave me a few more drinks and soon we were in bed. It can't be explained simply, but this time I spent the night in his bed. You know the rest. I feel so awful about the whole thing. I have never done anything like this with him or anyone else at any other time. I had plenty of time to think about what I did, and I can't blame you for how you reacted. Had the situation been reversed, I realized that I would have done the exact same thing myself. Please write me back and tell me what you think of me. I am scared to read what you might say, but I pray that you find a way to forgive me. Your loving wife, Donna. Hugh slowly reread the letter and his stomach rumbled. It became especially unpleasant when he reread the paragraphs describing what she had done to Jerry. The fact that she had confirmed what he believed made him wince. He realized that somewhere in the back of his mind he had been hoping to hear that it had all been a mistake on his part. The realization that it wasn't a mistake made him start fighting his feelings again. He turned off the computer and lay down on the bed. He spent the next 2 hours staring at the ceiling and deep in thought, until finally, sleep overcame him. The next morning he woke up on top of his blanket, still fully dressed. When he returned to his room, he already knew what he had to do. Without thinking, he turned on his laptop and started writing. Dear Donna, I am very happy to hear that Bobby seems to be on the mend. I don't know if I should let him know that we are communicating or not. If you don't think it would cause a problem, please tell him I think of him often. I will be here for at least another month. After that, I have the option to extend my contract by 2 weeks. I haven't decided what I will do when my first term is up. I think it will depend on what position we find ourselves in. The only way I see that we can get past this is for you to fully describe everything that was said and done when you were with Jerry. If you can't do that, I'm not sure I can get over it. When I know all the sordid details, it will be easier for me to know what I can forgive and whether I can even get over it. I'm not going to make any promises to you, but I must say that any further betrayal will definitely be the end of us. The only possible way I can get over it is if I feel I can regain trust in you. That is probably more important than whether I can forgive and forget. Take the time to reply to me, and be sure to tell me everything. Please copy your letter for Kathy as well. Hugh. Before he sent the message to Donna, he added CC for Kathy. He felt a huge sense of relief that it was done. For the last couple of weeks, he had strongly doubted that he would ever communicate with Donna again in any form. If he could get past this first step, perhaps they could resolve their serious differences. Shaking the heaviness off his shoulders after sending the first letter, Hugh decided to go back to the cafeteria and have a cup of coffee, or maybe eat a piece of pie if it seemed appetizing. He was surprised to see that the cafeteria was still crowded, with over 50 employees scattered around the room. Taking a coffee and a piece of apple pie, he headed to the nearest table and sat down across from a few employees who were already there. He was about to finish his pie when he happened to look up and noticed that the employee sitting across from him was actually a woman. A rather striking woman with short black hair and very dark eyes. At first glance, he thought she was probably a local, but realized that her skin was very fair. You seem to really like pie, she said. She watched him with a small, pleasant smile on her face, apparently waiting for his response. As a matter of fact, I do. I've been here for over a week now, and most of the meals I've had haven't been memorable in the slightest. This piece of pie is the best I've tasted. Having said that, Hugh grinned and took a sip of coffee. To tell you the truth, you surprised me. You're the first woman I've seen on this side of the cafeteria tray line. I can tell by your clothes that you work somewhere on the street. What do you work as? I'm an electrician. Been working here non-stop for almost 4 months now. What about you? She inquired. I've only been here a couple weeks. I'm a hoist operator, or crane operator if you prefer. Her eyes ran over his face a few times before she said, You look a little chipper today. I've seen you in the cafeteria a few times, and you always looked so hunted. Something must have changed in your life. You're very observant, Hugh said. He glanced at her once more as her words surprised him. He hadn't realized that his struggle with his feelings for Donna had affected his appearance as much as his soul. Hugh stared at his coffee for a few moments before continuing. I came here to get my mind off my serious problems with my wife, and I sent her an email a few minutes ago. This is the first communication I've had with her in almost 3 weeks. I've sent her a couple messages through my sister, but this was the first direct communication. They must have had serious intentions if you came here to get away from them and took the ring off. His table mate sipped her coffee and took a sip, watching him over the rim of the cup. You're certainly observant, since you noticed I don't have a ring. When I first took it off, the mark was much less white. Yes, things are as serious as they can be between husband and wife. So serious that I already have a lawyer working on a divorce. That reminds me, by the way, that I should ask him to stick around for a few days while she and I have a little talk, or rather, email correspondence. Hugh smiled and said, I suppose if we're going to talk about the state of my marriage, I should at least introduce myself. My name is Hugh McLean. He extended his hand across the table. It's a pleasure to meet you, Hugh McLean. My name is Janice Stetler. She raised her right hand and shook John's hand firmly. Hugh noticed that her handshake was very firm for a woman and her hand was slightly calloused from work. He glanced at her left hand and noticed that there were no rings on it, nor was there any indication that there had ever been any. As she returned her hand to its original place next to her coffee cup, a large man stood up from a table 10 feet away and walked over to their table. Everything okay, Janice? He had a questioning look on his face. Oh yes, Billy. This is Hugh McLean. He and I were just having a nice chat. Thanks for asking. She smiled at Billy before answering. When she finished speaking, he gave her a slight wave and returned to his seat. What was that about? Hugh hesitated before asking. A questioning expression appeared on his face as this brief exchange left him puzzled. Oh, Billy's on my team. They're really looking out for me since there are a few not-so-decent guys working in this precinct. I got into serious trouble with one of them my first week on the job, and the rest of my team has been keeping an eye on me ever since. She was very serious now, and her voice lowered. If Billy and another guy hadn't gotten there in time, something very bad would have happened. Now when men talk to me, they usually find out if I've had any unwanted advances. It's nice to know they stick up for you like that. I hadn't thought about the problems a woman might face on this construction site. Are you the only one like that, or are there others I just didn't notice? There are a few others, I don't know exactly how many. We have a separate dormitory from you guys. A few of them are truck drivers, and there's another electrician, but she's not on my shift or crew. Hugh and Janice continued to talk for a while longer, but never returned to the subject of the state of his marriage or what had sparked his newfound interest in life. After about 10 minutes, Janice got up to go back to her dorm room. Hugh followed her, as he wanted to get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow was going to be another long day in a string of long days. As he fell asleep, he thought about how lucky he was to have found such a nice new friend. Perhaps she could give him an unbiased female perspective on things. The next day passed rather quickly for Hugh, and he didn't hear from either Donna or Kathy. He did, however, send a letter to his attorney asking him to hold off on the divorce. In the evening, he went to dinner a little later than usual, hoping that he would run into Janice again. He decided to ask her for advice if she wouldn't mind giving it, of course. Hugh found her sitting at the same table as the previous evening, chatting with her friend Billy. Taking his food, he asked if he could join them, but both insisted that he sit at their table. When they finished their meal, Billy excused himself, saying that he had laundry to do. Janice hurriedly told him that she was fine and that she would see him at work tomorrow. I'm in a bit of a quandary, Janice. I'm hoping I can get some feminine advice about my wife's situation. The only person I can ask is my sister, and she is a very good friend of my wife. Would you mind discussing some matters with her? Hugh sat in silence while Janice pondered her answer. I'm not really qualified to give such advice. I've never been in a situation with a partner that seems as serious as the one you find yourself in. I was married, but it ended abruptly, without divorce. My husband was killed by a hit-and-run driver a little over 2 years ago. However, if you think I can help, please ask your questions. I'm very sorry to hear that your husband ended his life, especially in this way. It must have been difficult. I didn't realize you were married. Maybe we should forget about all of this. It's probably a bad idea on my part. No, go ahead. I just wanted to warn you that you're not getting some expert here. Janice laughed and took another sip of coffee. All right, Hugh replied calmly. I'll keep my remarks as short and to the point as possible. I found out a couple weeks ago that my wife was having a brief affair with a friend of mine. She's been with him twice. He seems to have used wine, some manipulation, and even a vague threat to help overcome her inhibitions, but I don't think it was anything like an assault. At one point, she seems to have been at least partially consenting. Presumably, she'll send me a detailed description of what actually happened, but of course it will only be her words. Hugh fell silent, taking a slow sip from his cup of coffee. He could see that Janice was listening intently to his words, and so he continued. She seems to be really serious about saying it will never happen again. Donna apparently tried to commit suicide and is now on antidepressants. I'm not exactly sure how I feel about her, but she says she still loves me. He took another sip of coffee and spoke again. In order for things to get better, I have to believe her, forgive her, try to forget what happened, and finally trust her. I just don't know if that's possible. I guess I'd like to get your opinion on what my wife did. Hugh laughed and said, I won't necessarily agree, and I certainly won't blame you if it's wrong. I'm just desperate for another opinion. Wow, that's a tough one. I was hoping I could put myself in her shoes, but from what you've told me, it might not be easy. I just can't imagine myself alone with my husband's friend drinking and agreeing to anything sexual. I'm afraid that wouldn't be me. Still, she seems very remorseful. Janice raised her eyes to the ceiling, deep in thought, and a few moments passed before she continued. I would advise you to proceed slowly and calmly, and see if you have a way to verify her story. An option would be to contact your former friend that she was with. If you could find out some of her story from him or see if she is telling you the truth, maybe that would help you make a decision. Other than that, I think it depends on how you feel about her. If you can do without the facts, perhaps time will take care of the rest. Hugh pondered her words for a few moments before replying. You know, I think you've helped me. I think I'll go slow and quiet. I don't want to contact my former friend about this, and I'm not sure I'll believe everything he tells me. Right now, I don't have a chance to verify what she's telling me, but maybe something will become clearer. Thank you for at least thinking about my problem and offering advice. I'll keep thinking about it until I get the next email from her. Now, I think it's time to get off topic. Why don't you tell me something about yourself? Janice blushed slightly when Hugh suggested she tell her about herself. Well, I don't really have anything to tell. I'm 30, I'm a widow, as I said, and I'm an electrician. When I'm not busy with that kind of work, I live in Seattle. This is my last tour here. I finish in 2 more days, and I should have enough money to buy my own place. My husband left me a bunch of debt, certainly not on purpose, and I finally got out of it a few months ago. I managed to get a job in the maintenance department of the power plant during my last vacation, so when I leave here, I won't have to worry about coming back anymore. She gave him a pleasant smile, ending the conversation and sipping some more coffee. Damn, I didn't realize you were leaving so soon. I've enjoyed your company and our little chats, and I may have a few more questions for you. Hugh smiled, then shrugged. Looks like I'll have to forge my own path. Truth be told, it will ultimately be my decision. Perhaps seeking your advice is just a way to delay the inevitable. They made small talk for a few more minutes before deciding it was time to call it a day. They agreed to have coffee together the next evening. That night, as Hugh fell asleep, he alternated between talking to Janice and pictures of Donna and Bobby's life. The next day after work, there were still no messages from Donna and Kathy. He realized he couldn't rush things. Everything now depended on Donna. Later that evening, Hugh went down to the cafeteria and spent a pleasant hour with Janice, most of the time discussing fishing, a sport they both enjoyed. They agreed to meet the next evening for a farewell cup of coffee. When Hugh checked his email that evening, he received the 2 messages he had been expecting. Judging by the timestamps on the messages, he must have just missed them the previous evening. He thought long and hard about which one to open and finally decided to leave both until later in the evening. He could be in a good mood as he joined Janice and her coworkers for coffee on her last night in the dorm. After shaving and combing his hair, he headed for the cafeteria. Janice was sitting at her usual table, and this time it looked like she had her whole team with her, intent on making her last night at the construction site a memorable one. There was much laughter and joking. When Hugh entered the cafeteria, Janice immediately called out to him, insisting that he join their group. He grabbed a soft drink and approached their table. Welcome, Hugh. I'm glad you could join our little get-together. These guys are my team that I've been working with since I got here. Janice introduced Hugh to them, explaining that he was the only nice guy she'd ever met who wasn't an electrician. This elicited a raucous laugh from Hugh. He soon joined in with the jokes of the others, many of which were addressed to Janice. Over the next hour, the crew gradually dwindled as people left. Eventually, only Hugh and Janice were left at the table, and he said, "This was much more fun than reading my wife's last letter. It should detail exactly what happened, and I'm not ashamed to admit that I don't really want to read it. I hope when I get to the end I don't decide to fly back and strangle them both." He laughed, but it was a nervous laugh, because his last statement was very close to what he was really thinking. "Well, Hugh McLean, I don't think you're the sort to take the law into your own hands. I'm sure they're safe enough, though of course you'll have to decide on the state of your marriage. I hope things work out well and that whatever happens, you'll be happy in the end. You seem to be the kind of person who deserves a happy ending." She smiled at him and then took his hand for a final handshake. She stood up, intending to return to her room to begin packing for the morning flight to civilization. Hugh was confused, but finally said, "I'm very glad to have met you, Janice. It's nice to have a friendly face that I look forward to meeting. I have enjoyed our conversations immensely, and perhaps someday I will come to your part of the country to see if the fishing here really is as good as you say it is." He took her hand in both of his and shook it one last time. As she walked away, he felt that familiar feeling of loneliness again. He sat at the table for another 15 minutes before he too went to his room. Sitting down at his computer, Hugh decided to read his sister's email first, expecting it to be shorter. He opened Kathy's message and read it slowly. "Dear Hugh, I have read Donna's letter and have only a couple things to add to it. First, when she first told me what had happened, she indicated that Jerry had given her more wine than she mentions now. I also remember that the second time she was at his house, he had to hold her hand to help her up the stairs to the second floor because she had too much to drink to climb the stairs on her own. I seriously considered the possibility that he might have put something in her drinks, something that made them stronger than usual. I called her and asked her why she was downplaying these things, and she said she didn't want it to look like she was blaming Jerry for everything. She wants to take her share of responsibility for what happened. Whatever you think of her in regards to what happened, I want you to know that I believe her when she says she loves you and would never do anything like that to hurt you again. Your loving sister, Kathy." Hugh sat in silence for a few minutes, pondering his sister's words and her message. He also wondered if Jerry had slipped something into Donna's drinks. It wasn't beyond the realm of possibility and certainly spoke in her favor. Either way, he would have to read her message before making a decision. Now that he had no more excuses not to open Donna's email, he clicked on it. A few moments later it opened, filling the entire screen. He sat staring at it, afraid to start reading the words he knew would upset him terribly. "My dear Hugh, this is my third attempt to begin this letter. I have been just staring at this screen for hours now, trying to decide what to say. You asked me to tell you the whole story, nothing but the truth, and as hard as it is for me, I intend to do so. First, before you read this, I have to tell you that I love you very, very much. I would give anything to be able to erase the past and the mistakes I have made. I pray that you decide to give me another chance to be the wife you deserve. Before I get to the details, I have to say that I told Bobby that you are thinking of him, and he is very happy to hear that. He still asks about you every day, wondering when you're coming home. I don't want to give him false hopes, so I told him that you and I still have a lot to talk about. I don't seem to have a way to avoid the details of what happened between Jerry and me, so I might as well just do it. As far as I know and remember, I'm telling you everything exactly. If anything seems unclear to you, or if you have any questions for me, please ask them, and let me forget this horrible memory." That first Friday, Jerry called me at work around 2 o'clock and asked if I wanted to come over for dinner. He was going to make hamburgers and salad. I told him I didn't think it would be appropriate since you were out of town and Allison was in California. He insisted that neither you nor Allison would mind, and I finally agreed. When I arrived, it was about 6 o'clock and he was standing on the patio setting up the barbecue. He brought me a glass of wine and we sat on the terrace talking about the most ordinary things, the things we always talked about when the two couples were together. He made a few remarks about my looks and how highly he appreciated my figure. I laughed at them, as I didn't think he was saying anything different than he usually did. We ate on the patio and eventually took all the dishes to the kitchen where I started rinsing the plates and putting everything in the dishwasher. While I was bent over the dishwasher, he came up behind me and put his hand on my butt. After my request, it took him a few seconds to remove his hand, but he finally did. He stayed by my side the entire time I was doing the dishes, but he didn't do or say anything inappropriate. By this time, it was almost 8 o'clock, and after pouring me more wine, he took me into the living room. He sat down in an armchair and I settled down on the couch. We continued talking, and around 8:30 he turned on some music on the stereo and then took my glass into the kitchen to fill it with wine. Sometime around 9 o'clock he got up and walked over to where I was sitting to ask me to dance with him. There was no reason to refuse, and I joined him for 2 or 3 songs. We danced pretty close, and I was starting to feel the effects of the wine. Jerry only hummed when I asked him to back off a bit, so I didn't pay much attention as we danced the next few songs. When the slow songs were over, I went back to my seat, but this time he sat next to me and put his hand on my shoulder. He took it away when I asked him to, but continued to sit next to me. After a couple minutes, he put his arm around me again, and this time I didn't insist that he take his hand away. And for nothing, because now I think that was all he needed. He held out my wine glass to me and coaxed me to finish it so he could get me a refill. By this time, his glass was empty, and I felt obligated to finish mine. When he brought the glasses, he sat down next to me again and put his arm around me. I felt flushed from the wine and agreed with him when he suggested we pretend we were young again. We drank some more wine and eventually got down to business. He tried to talk me into going upstairs with him, but I pushed him away after realizing what I had done. I cried and curled up on the couch. He tried again, but I remember slapping him and telling him to leave me alone. Jerry got up and left, and I apparently fell asleep right there on the couch. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I woke up with a bad headache lying on the couch. I was so upset that I ran barefoot to my car and drove home. All the next week, I was very angry with him and did not respond to the few messages he left on our answering machine. Finally, on Friday afternoon, he called my office again. He asked me to come over to his place that evening, and when I flatly refused, he said he just wanted to make amends for what had happened. When I continued to refuse, he said he hoped he wouldn't accidentally blab to you about our adventures. It wasn't hard to realize that he was trying to warn me that I'd better come, so I agreed after all, even though I really didn't feel like going. He asked me to come at 8:30, which I did. In no way did I want anything to happen, although I was afraid it would end up in fondling and petting like the first time. The outfit I wore was the least revealing, as I hoped he wouldn't get the urge to try anything. When I arrived, he handed me a glass of white wine and we sat in the kitchen at the table, drinking it and talking. I told him how upset I was about the previous Friday, and he apologized. He didn't get anywhere, so I relaxed and didn't mind when he filled my glass with wine. I guess it wasn't even an hour after I walked in that I noticed the effects of the wine. I had about a glass and a half, but I felt like I would have felt after 3 or 4. I don't want to say that he put something stronger in my wine, but I thought it was strange that it had such a quick effect on me. The next moment, Jerry led me to the stairs upstairs. He said that we had gotten the couch dirty last time and he didn't want to clean it again. For some reason, that made sense to me, and I followed him up the stairs to the master bedroom. Once in the bedroom, we laid down on it. The next thing I knew, I woke up as the sun was already up. I was lying in bed with Jerry, facing him. He was asleep, so I carefully got up, gathered my clothes from the floor, and went to the bathroom. When I came back, he asked where I was going. I said I'd get dressed and leave, but he didn't like that. He wanted more. And he got what he wanted. You know the rest? When I got home, saw your note and found the ring, I lost my head. Katie told you about it in some detail, so I won't repeat myself. I just finished reading everything I wrote to you describing what happened those 2 nights, and I don't know what you'll think of it. As much as I blame Jerry, especially for that last time, there's no doubt that a lot of it was my fault. I shouldn't have gone back there a second time after what happened the first time, and the effect his drinking had on me. I would have been much better off telling you about the first incident and accepting your justified reaction to it than going there again. I can't predict what you will think of me now, and I am tempted to just delete this entire post rather than send it to you. It takes a very strong person to forgive me for this, and I can easily understand that it would be very hard for you to trust me again, considering how stupid I acted. Please know that I love you. There is nothing I wouldn't do to make it up to you, and I just pray that you'll give me a chance. I ask that you wait a few days before you let me know your decision, because I know how upset you will be when you finish this message. Your loving wife, Donna. Hugh sat like a chained man, finishing Donna's letter until he finally closed it. turned off the light, and lay down on the bed. The story of her infidelity had hit him much harder than he had expected. His chest felt empty. Images from her long letter flashed through his mind. He must have dozed off for a few minutes at some point, but in the morning he realized it wouldn't last long. He'd spent most of the night thinking about her message and everything that followed from it. When he got up, he was still fully dressed from the previous day, so the first thing he did was grab some fresh clothes and go down to the shower room. When he returned, he felt much better, and standing under the hot jets of the shower, he came to a final decision. He pulled a suitcase out of the small closet, took out a framed photograph from their wedding day, and placed it on the bedside table. After much thought, he decided to try to make a relationship work and wanted to be able to see his family every morning when he opened his eyes. He headed to the dining room to eat breakfast, the start of another long day. In the evening, while sitting in the cafeteria, he happened to look up and saw his friend Frank Carpenter walk in. "Frank, come in and sit down. Where have you been lately? I haven't seen you in a couple weeks." Frank joined Hugh at the table and said, "Yeah, it's been a while. They're short on truck drivers, so I've been moonlighting. I saw you here a few times this evening, but you were busy talking to a woman, so I decided not to bother you. It's okay if you come over. I just wanted to get her advice on what's going on with Donna. How are you doing? I'm wondering how you're dealing with all of this." Hugh smiled and said, "Believe it or not, last night I finally decided what I was going to do. After reading the details of what happened between her and Jerry, I'm almost convinced that Jerry either spiked her drinks with pure alcohol or slipped something into them. She made some very stupid decisions, but I'm inclined to believe her story. I don't know of any way to prove that he did anything to her drinks, and I doubt I'll believe anything he says about it." "Well, you're a much more forgiving person than I am. I wish you luck." They diverted from the subject of Donna and Jerry and moved on to more mundane topics about their work and the trials and tribulations of working at a remote facility. As they parted, they agreed to try to spend more time together, especially at dinner. Back in his room, Hugh decided that he was too tired to answer Donna's letter that evening and would leave that task for the next evening. It was very easy for him to fall asleep that night, as he now felt that there was hope for the family's salvation. The next evening, Hugh hurried back from dinner so that he would have time to send the letter to Donna. He thought for a long time about what to say and immediately began typing. "Dear Donna, as you can imagine, the details of your interactions with Jerry were very difficult for me, and I spent a sleepless night going over in my mind everything that happened between you. I've given a lot of thought to your words, and I think I've come to my decision. First, I've decided to admit that you've told me the whole story. I have no reason to think that you made up the details of what happened, and I have no other way to prove or disprove what you have told me. Second, it sounds very much like Jerry either intentionally got you drunk or perhaps gave you something. Your descriptions of how you felt, combined with the realization that you made some really stupid decisions, suggest that what happened is not something you would normally agree to. If what I just wrote is to be believed, I'm going to have to try to forgive you for your part in all of this. It will probably be a long time before I fully forgive you, but I'm working on it. I will probably never forget what happened, and it will be hard for me to fully trust you. I will work on not punishing you for what happened. You will have to be patient with me through all of this, and you will have to be completely honest and faithful to me in the future. I don't promise that I will never bring it up again, but I will try very hard not to keep it in your head. It won't be easy for us to overcome all of this, but I'm willing to try. When I get back from here, we can meet up and talk about it a bit before I go back to the house. I really want to see you and Bobby, and I'm looking forward to my last day here. Your husband." Hugh reread what he had written several times before finally hitting the send button. When the message finally disappeared from the screen, he let out a long sigh, not realizing that he had stopped to hold his breath while he made his final decision. Over the next few days, Hugh and Donna exchanged emails. She was thrilled that he had decided to give her another chance, while he became more and more resigned to his decision. His sister wrote him a long email congratulating him on making the right choice. All in all, it was a pleasant time for both of them. It had been 4 days since Hugh and Frank Carpenter had last met in the cafeteria. Upon entering the cafeteria, Hugh saw his friend sitting at a table and immediately joined him, picking up his food. "So, Frank, how's it going?" Hugh took a bite from his food, waiting for Frank's response. "Not great." Frank reached under the table and pulled out a pair of crutches. I was checking my load this morning and some pipes shifted and caught my left leg. I was told I have a couple broken bones in the top of my foot, so it's in a temporary cast right now. Looks like I'll be able to go home early for compensation. Damn, Frank, that's no fun. How does it feel? Doesn't hurt? Actually, it's fine right now. It's only if I put pressure on my foot that I feel pain, so that rules out driving anything with a clutch. Unfortunately, that's all they have here. Nothing but standard transmissions. They'll send me on my way in the morning and I'll be home by tomorrow evening. I almost envy you. I have a couple more weeks here before I can go back and see how Donna and I managed to be together again. We've been exchanging emails and so far things look good, but I expect living in the same room together will be a challenge. So you're okay with getting back together with her? No doubts? Hugh thought for a second and replied, I guess I've always had my doubts, but I don't have a way to check her story. I won't contact Jerry about it, and what else can I do? Hopefully, by looking her in the eye when we talk about it, I'll know everything I need to know. All I can say is that you are a better man than I am, Hugh. I doubt very much if I would be so lenient. Mind you, I've never been married, so it's easy for me to say that. Frank left his comments at that, and the two of them finished their meal in relative silence. When they resumed their conversation, it was about work and the fact that Frank had a long day of airports and flights the next day. Over the next week, Hugh and Donna exchanged emails daily, and he increasingly liked the idea that their marriage could become a reality. He now realized that he hadn't stopped loving her, and he had serious problems with forgiving and forgetting, but he felt he could work on them if he had the time. All in all, though, he was happy and looking forward to seeing his stay in Alaska come to an end. Friday night, Hugh returned to his room in high spirits. One more week and he would be home. It couldn't be that soon. He turned on his laptop expecting to get only the daily email from Donna, but saw that he also had a message from Frank Carpenter. He couldn't wait to hear back from Donna, so he read her message first. It contained nothing new, only repeated how much she wanted him to come home. Hugh liked reading her messages because they reassured him that he had made the right decision, so he immediately replied to her message. In his reply, he told her how much he was looking forward to being home. Deciding to save Frank's message for later, Hugh headed to the cafeteria for a leisurely dinner. Now that Frank and Janice Stetler were gone, he kept to himself. Many of the workers were quite rough, and Hugh didn't really fit in with their company. He preferred his company to their company. Eventually, he returned to his room and decided to read Frank's letter. Calling it up, he saw that there were attachments to the letter and wondered what Frank had sent him. He expected to find in it the latest racy cartoon or picture that was now gobbling around the internet. Hugh, before you open the attached pictures, you'd better read my entire message. I will try to explain what is depicted in the pictures as it is not always obvious. While I was flying here, I started thinking about your situation with Donna and decided that I would try to help you decide if you should trust her. My car has an automatic transmission, so I knew I could get around in it without any problems. Since I am in the photography business and my salary is paid for by compensation, I decided to try to keep an eye on your wife for you. For the last 5 days, I have been checking on her at home and at work to see where she has been. I also went in and checked on Jerry Black a few times just to see what he was up to. Everything was perfectly fine until today. At noon, I drove to Donna's work to check on her car, and just as I pulled up, she pulled out of the parking lot ahead of me. Since I had nothing better to do, I decided to just follow her and see what she was doing on her lunch break. She pulled into the mall parking lot. I parked 2 rows away from her and waited for her to enter the mall. I don't get around very well on crutches, so I didn't feel like following her. It's a good thing I didn't go because she came back 15 minutes later. I saw her walking toward me and Jerry Black was with her. I took a picture of them, tagging them with number 1. Since I was parked, I had a very good view of them the whole time. They were standing and talking near your wife's car, and she was standing with her back to it with her hands on the hood. That's mark number 2. They talked for a couple minutes, but I couldn't tell from the expression on your wife's face whether she was happy about it or not. Her expression was pretty neutral the whole time. Suddenly, Jerry leaned forward and kissed her. This kiss is labeled number 3. It wasn't just a quick peck on the lips, it lasted at least 2 or 3 seconds. I was just about to take the second picture when he pulled away. She didn't move when he kissed her, didn't try to move away or push him away. It's unclear what she said to him, and when she leaned back, she may have lost her balance and couldn't raise her hand to push him away. I just don't know. They talked for a few more seconds and then she got into her car. His car was only 3 parking spaces away from hers, and he pulled out of his spot before she started driving. She pulled out behind him, and I tried to skip behind them, but I was held up by a couple of other cars pulling out in front of me. I got to the exit, and the last photo, number 4, shows both of their cars standing in the intersection turning left. The traffic light had just changed, and I found myself wedged behind the 2 cars so I couldn't follow them any further. By the time I pulled into the street, they were out of sight. I spent the next 2 hours driving around town trying to find Donna's car, but I never did. I'd been by your house twice, in the parking lot at her office, several times at Jerry's house, and even drove through the parking lots of all the motels down the street from the mall. But to my delight, I couldn't find it there either. I have no idea where they went. I finally gave up. But when I pulled up to your house at 5 o'clock, her car was there. Out of curiosity, I drove by Jerry's house again, but his car wasn't there. That's all I can tell you about these photographs. I'll have to leave it up to you to decide what they mean. I really hope it's not what it seems. There may be a good explanation, but I'm afraid you'll have to find out from her. I will continue to follow her until you return. If I don't contact you, know that I don't see anything suspicious. And don't worry about Jerry. I have plans for him. Tail? Frank? Finished reading the letter, Hugh sat stunned, almost in shock. Finally, he opened the photos attached to the letter and looked at each one 3 or 4 times before closing the letter and shutting down the laptop. He collapsed on his bed and lay staring at the ceiling in deep thought for almost 20 minutes. Suddenly, he got up and went back to the computer. After much thought, he decided to write Donna a message that was going to ruin their relationship. He had already decided what the message would be about and started typing it as soon as he sat down at his desk. He knew it had to sound just like all the others he had sent her lately. My dear Donna, a thought occurred to me that I wanted to express in my last message to you. Have you been bothered by Jerry since you were at his house the second time? You haven't mentioned any messages from him, and I'm just wondering if he's been in touch with you since then. What about Allison? She must be back from California by now. How have you been in touch with her? I can't imagine him leaving you alone after everything that's happened. Please let me know if there are any problems with him. I can call him when I get back so he knows his attention is not appreciated by any of us. I am a little tired today, so I'm ending this message and will write you again tomorrow. Your loving husband. After sending the message, Hugh went to bed, but slept very little that night. He spent most of the night looking at the photograph he kept on his bedside table and thinking about the unexpected turn his life had taken. He had almost convinced himself that his life and marriage were a done deal, but Frank's message had shaken that confidence badly. He had never considered himself a religious man, but now he prayed that Donna would give a logical explanation for what had happened in the mall parking lot. The next day passed for Hugh as if in slow motion. He spent all his free time wondering what Donna would say, and it bothered him greatly that when he returned to his room in the evening, there were no new messages in his email account. Any other day, there would have been a message waiting for him. Hugh ate quickly and, after making sure there were no messages from Donna, went to bed. He was just about to fall asleep when he heard a faint zing, indicating that a letter had arrived. He immediately got to his feet and headed for the computer, not thinking about sleep. He quickly called up the email from Donna, but didn't immediately pay attention to the time. It was 9:30 in Alaska, which meant she'd sent the message at 1:30 a.m. her time. Why was she texting him so late at night, he wondered. Had she really just gotten home? Unable to wait any longer, he opened the long-awaited letter. My dear Hugh, goodness, 2 messages in one evening. I'm not used to such things. I'm glad you asked me about Allison and whether I'd heard from her since her return from California. She called me twice, once last night. I put it on pause as I didn't want to see her. I'm afraid I'll feel too guilty about what happened and confess everything to her. After everything that has happened to our marriage, I don't want to ruin it. I'm sure she would leave him if she found out. She once told me that she suspected he was having an affair or two, so my confirmation of that will surely spur her into action. Jerry called me twice, both times a couple days after you found out about us. Both times, I told him I didn't want to hear from him again, and he hasn't called me since. Last week I saw him driving down the street, but after that I haven't seen him at all. I have no desire to see him again. Donna's message had several paragraphs about how she was anxious to see him, and he reread it twice to make sure it didn't say anything more about Jerry. After making sure she hadn't added anything else on the subject, he closed the notebook rudely. His eyes glistened with unshed tears as he walked over to the table beside the bed and picked up the photograph. Taking one look at it, he threw it across the room with a cry, "You lying bitch!" The photograph hit the corner of the closet with a clatter, scattering shards of glass and chips from the frame across the room. A moment later, there was a knock on the door and someone asked, "Are you all right, buddy?" Hugh shook his head and a moment later was back in the here and now, where his consciousness had transported him. "Yeah, I'm fine. Sorry about the noise." It took him half an hour to remove the glass and wood from the floor and sweep up the small splinters. When it was all in the trash can, he picked up the photograph. It was punctured in two places and torn down the center from top to halfway down. Hugh saw that the tear would almost completely separate him from Donna and Bobby if it continued like this. He carefully pulled at both halves and, when the painting was completely torn in two, tossed them into the wastebasket. Hugh now felt surprisingly calm and sat down at the computer again. He spent half an hour getting a new email account for himself, researched how to cancel the old one, and sent messages to Frank and his lawyer so they would know his new contact information. When he was done, he was ready to reply to Donna, quoting her last message and attaching the 4 photos Frank had sent him. "Lies, lies, lies. How could you do this to me? Did you think because I was going to get you back, you could do whatever you wanted? Did you think I was such a simpleton that you could feed me all kinds of nonsense? I already told you what happens if you're not completely honest with me. You'll get divorce papers from my lawyer. I'll stay here for a few more weeks, and he'll take care of everything. This email account will be canceled as soon as I finish sending this message. Don't even try to contact me. I don't want to hear from your lying ass anymore. It is clear from the pictures I am attaching to this message that you lied about seeing Jerry again, and I'm wondering where you got him. I'm also wondering how many other lies you've told me. Frankly, I'm not interested in knowing the answers. I'm not even going to blame you for the pain I'm in right now. It's my own fault. I got some good advice to take my time with the answer, and I ignored it. I thought I could trust you. Silly me." Hugh sent the letter to his sister as well. He suspected she knew about Donna's lies and didn't want to talk to her. Before closing the laptop, Hugh deleted his old email account. He felt completely drained and exhausted, and it didn't take him long to fall asleep curled up in a ball. The next morning, before heading to work, Hugh extended his contract for another 2 weeks. He wanted and needed that much time to settle down before returning home. Besides, this time would give him a chance to decide what course his life would take. Kathy Roberts sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee before the kids got up. It was barely 7 in the morning, but that was the time she usually got up and went to bed. This morning, however, a light knock on the kitchen door startled her. When she went to the door, she was shocked to see her brother Hugh there. "Huey, where did you come from? Come in." Grabbing his hand, she dragged him into the kitchen. "I've been in town for a few days and just wanted to stop by to say goodbye before I left." "Say goodbye? What do you mean? Where are you going?" She looked at him with an expression of deep concern on her face. Hugh walked past her and poured himself a cup of coffee before answering. "Like I said, I came to say goodbye. I sold my car and bought a pickup truck with a matching trunk lid. I've loaded all my stuff from storage into it and I'm ready to hit the road. I thought I should let you know about it so you can tell the rest of the family." "You can't leave without talking to Donna." Kathy reached for the phone, but before she could dial, Hugh snatched the receiver from her and put it back. "I'm not going to talk to Donna. If you try to call her again, I'm just going to leave right now." Hugh sat down at the table and took a sip of coffee. Kathy was visibly upset and said, "You should talk to her. Have her tell you what happened at the mall. Jerry came out of nowhere. She was asking him to leave her alone when he leaned over and kissed her. She didn't have time to react. She can explain that it was just a coincidence that she pulled out of the parking lot right behind him." Hugh said this with an impassive expression on his face. "It doesn't matter anymore, Kathy. I'm not going to risk letting her hurt me anymore. Tell me honestly, how can I ever believe or trust her again? What you just told me could be true, but if it is, why didn't she tell me that instead of the lies she wrote?" There were tears in Katie's eyes. She was afraid you would take it the wrong way. It was a stupid thing to do, but that doesn't mean you should give up on her. She's devastated and realizes she screwed up big time again. She tried to contact you via email, but the emails kept getting sent back. She even found a phone number, but all she could do was leave a message for you. I know she left messages. I was given them, but I threw them away. I seriously told her I didn't want to communicate with her anymore. My lawyer told me she already has the divorce papers, but she hasn't sent him a signed copy yet. I signed everything that needed to be signed while I was here this week. Now it's just a formality. They don't even need her signature. It's just that I'll be free of her a little longer without it. Tears ran down Katie's cheeks and she wiped them away before she said, "She broke off the relationship. She doesn't want a divorce. She just wants you back with her. I would really like you to come and talk to her. I'm sure you can understand what she's going through and what all this has done to her." "That's not going to happen, Kathy. Maybe she'll decide to pursue Jerry for real if she can get past Allison." "I don't mind that. I really do care." Hugh took another sip of coffee, keeping an impassive expression on his face. "You don't know, do you? Someone called Allison and told her about Jerry and Donna. She met with Donna, and Donna told her what happened. Allison threw a cup at her and it hit her in the face. All that was left was a bruise. After that, Allison packed up her things and moved to California to live with her sister." Kathy threw Hugh a questioning look, then continued, "I don't suppose you know about Jerry, do you? He was attacked about 2 weeks ago. My neighbor works at the hospital and she said he was in intensive care. 2 men attacked him with pieces of rebar. You didn't set that up, did you?" Hugh smiled to himself when Kathy asked if he had anything to do with it. "No, I had nothing to do with it. If I had known who it was, I would have gladly bought him a beer or a few beers. Nothing could have happened to the best guy." Kathy sat in silence for several minutes, wondering how to get Hugh to talk to Donna. Finally, she said, "Will you talk to Donna if I call her and give you her phone number? Would you do that for me, please? I really can't talk to her, Kathy. There's no way I'm going to change my mind about divorcing her. The more I thought about this Jerry thing, the more I realized that she's not just stupid. I believe that somewhere deep down inside she wanted a relationship with him. If I agreed to talk to her, it would only fuel her hopes, and that wouldn't be fair to her or Bobby. I'm at peace with my decision." Tears came to Katie's eyes again, and she said, "I guess I can understand that. Where are you going to go? Do you have something in mind?" Hugh finished his coffee, stood up and turned toward the door, getting ready to leave. "I'm going to try the Northwest. I have a contact in Seattle, so that's where I'm headed right now. If things work out in Seattle, I'll stay there. If not, who knows? I just know I can't stay here anymore. I'll text you later when I have a place to stay and I get my cell phone back. I have enough money left over from Alaska to last me for a while. The union gave me a transfer sheet, so I'll be able to join the local chapter of the civil engineers." Kathy stood up and gave her brother a big hug. Then they said their goodbyes and he walked out the door. As she watched him leave, tears ran down her cheeks again and she wiped them away as she closed the door and went to the phone. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and watch for the next video.